I needed to make some custom exterior exhaust vents because I couldn't really find any in the sizes I needed at Lowe's, which was pretty sad because the first one I needed was just for a 6-inch pipe, which is very common, but all they had were 4-inch. I did later go to Home Depot and they had some 6-inch covers, but they were pretty expensive and not very high quality. So I made a custom 6-inch cover and a 10-inch cover out of aluminum flashing that's generally used for roofing and things along those lines. I also used some hardware cloth for the grate and some aluminum screen mesh. The one-way flaps are attached by a piece of aluminum wire that is 16 gauge, and I just ended up bending that at a right angle on the interior to prevent it from sliding out, and I did a basic fold on the edge of the flap and wrapped it around and then continued to fold, and that creates that mechanical hinge that's required for the flaps. The anatomy of one of these vents is that it needs a grate and screen to prevent insects, birds, bats from entering the pipe, one-way flaps to prevent gusts of wind from entering the pipe, housing made of material that can resist weathering, in this case aluminum, and a design that allows all the water to exit so there is no buildup. On the interior, you need to make sure that your pipe section is long enough to extend out of the wall and allow ductwork to attach. I angled the entire unit at about 15 degrees so that water would fall back outside the pipe if any did enter, and I did this on the intake as well. Lastly, you need to insulate and or caulk on the inside and outside to prevent any water from entering and any air. So the first step was to mark out a perimeter for the inside and outside, and I actually am working on an intake, not an exhaust, but the process is pretty similar. You can see that I did 1-inch markings, and then I cut flaps on the sides, on the top, and I cut flaps on the bottom and diagonals on each of the inner corners. After bending everything, it looks like this, and you can see that there's a top and a bottom. The top will fold down so that water falls down, and the bottom will fold inward. You'll notice these gaps on the corners. We'll deal with that shortly. So I created these L-shaped tabs of metal, and they go on the corners, and we really only need these on the top 2 corners. And again, those are 1 inch by 4 inches, folded in half at 2 inches. Next, we need some kind of rain cover to help prevent water from going inside of the unit. And again, that is about a 1-inch tab with an overhang. Alright, now that the flap is on with those corners, I need to create some kind of folding on the grate and screen, which will then be screwed into the cover. Now it has to be pressed in place around the edges of the unit, and I decided to do the screen and then the grate, which is hardware cloth. The screen is aluminum. Next, I needed to fabricate some kind of entrance for the pipe, and I'm not actually using that piece of pipe that I'm holding. I ended up creating a custom one because I needed something to go through the wall that was a little bit longer anyway. And here is the result of what I ended up cutting out. You can see I tabbed all around the area that would be circular. That is a point of attachment to the pipe, and this shielding will go around the interior. And this is the final result after it's been screwed in place and attached to a piece of aluminum flashing I'm using as pipe. The only thing that needs to be done differently is that I need to make sure that the facing will still be vertical despite the 15-degree angle of the pipe coming out of the wall. And here is the same one done on the intake. That's a 10-inch diameter. There were other ways I could have done this intake, such as creating a triangular shape that pulled air from an area below the vent rather than sideways, but this was simpler at the time. You can see the vents after being installed. You still have to correct the angle on this one because the flaps are slightly open, but it's actually not that big of a deal because it will still prevent large gusts of wind from entering. There really wasn't much I could do to create a kind of check valve on the intake because it's intended to accept air from the outside, so I just made sure that it had a fine screen as well as that hardware cloth to prevent any critters from getting in.